This is Dr. Henry Stein, Director of the Alfred Adler Institute of San Francisco. In the following presentation, The Training of an Adlerian Psychotherapist, Sophia DeVries and I discuss the importance of mastering Alfred Adler's original teachings and applying them in a creative way in psychotherapy and counseling. This recording was made on May 3rd, 1980, in San Francisco. Sophia, this morning what I would like to focus on with you is the training of an Adlerian psychotherapist, and starting logically with perhaps what kind of person would be most adaptable or suitable to Adlerian training. Is there any way of feeling out an applicant, a prospect, someone who has had the basic training towards licensing, towards a degree program in counseling or psychology, who presents themselves to us for training and says, I would like to be an Adlerian? Would we basically accept anyone who expressed an interest, or are there some ways of appraising a person as to the probability of their success or lack of success?
No, I don't think that you can begin with appraising people. They come because they are interested, and they come because they are dissatisfied with what they have learned so far or what they have heard so far. And many people, of course, don't know too much about Adlerian psychology when they start out. And in the beginning, this is always the funny side of it, it looks like it is easy. And it is not hard to learn the principles, no. But then comes the application. And Adler himself said that it was simple to learn the principles, but it was very hard to apply in practice what he meant. Because what he wanted is a creative process, and not anything that goes according to rules 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So you cannot start at a particular part of Adlerian psychology and apply that in practice, and that go by the number 2 and the number 3 and the number 4. I have always called that painting by numbers, and I have seen people who had trained in Adlerian psychology and who did exactly that. They went by numbers. They said, well, first I have to do this, then I have to do that, then I have to do that. No, you don't. Because the main thing, the way Adler has explained it to us, is that you establish a very close relationship to begin with. And because of the relationship you have established, you can go on and the person feels comfortable in cooperating with you. And because of the cooperation, he does already something that he hasn't done too much of before, namely he shows the beginning of applying a social interest. The core of Adlerian psychology is always the social interest factor. And the other aspects, inferiority feelings, wanting to be on top, feeling that everybody has more than you have, and all these symptoms come at a different moment. They are not so important. You have to establish the relationship so that the person can cooperate with you in what you are doing. And what, as a therapist, you have to do is encourage, encourage, encourage. And another thing that Adler said, I recall very well, that you have to treat an adult with the same kindness and love that a mother would have for a child. So no aggressiveness, no attacking, no hitting people over the head with what you have found, but a result of everything that you work together on and gaining insight. And that is why a real Adlerian therapy that is done very well helps people from the very beginning. And they don't feel a frustration.
I have heard that it is somewhat common practice in some Adlerian training to have people go through a process of what is called doing a lifestyle for a client, which seems to be a kind of a very intensive interview process by a therapist or an assistant, followed up by a summary of the person's assets and liabilities and lifestyle, and then an interview in which the therapist or a therapist and assistant confront the client with a summary of their lifestyle. Oftentimes this appears to be done in about half a dozen sessions as a procedure. What are your comments about this approach?
It is not what Adler ever did. So I have a tendency to call it un-Adlerian. I can see that people use it as a method when they do not use a creative approach. Also, Adler did not have the idea that you need two people to treat a person. It seems to me if you would be in a fix and you would be accosted by two people who seem to know everything about you, that you would feel very inferior and that you would feel very much pressed in a corner, that you can't get out of the corner. And it is the opposite. I would have to see how it works, actually, to make a conclusion. But what Adler did was he encouraged the person from the very beginning that there was something that was positive in him. So every time, and we were told this by Adler, every time the person leaves, he has to have a little bit courage that he is not as bad as he thought he would be, and that the circumstances can be changed, and that he can feel different about it if he gains the insight in what he is doing. So every time, encouragement. Now, if I would hear a resume of what is ailing me, I would say, now, all right, now what am I going to do about it? And Adler encouraged by saying, what would you like to do about it? And the person was permitted to make a wrong step. But then Adler would, together with him, point out, this is a wrong step. This is not what leads in the direction you want to go. So let's look at it and let's change this.
So it was more of a feeling of working together rather than the expert who informs.
Absolutely. Adler stressed the idea that you have to make the person feel that you both are on the same level. He advised us to feel the way the client felt, to have so much absorbed of what the client would do that you would say, under the same circumstances with the person that you are, I would have done the same thing. Then you have really understood what it was that made him go in the direction where he got stuck.
So you could sit in that person's seat with him.
Exactly.
Saying, I know what that must have been like.
Yes.
And so the person then does not feel so alone, so foolish.
The person should never feel alone. And I get the impression from what you just told me that that would be more a feeling of being attacked by someone who knows everything better. And if you get that thing, then dynamically you should feel more inferior because everyone knows so easily what you couldn't find for yourself in a long time. If you discover step by step what it was that made you act the way you did, then you are in on the discovery. That's the difference.
Yeah,
otherwise it is thrown in your face.
Can we go back a little bit to the training? We seem to jump right in.
Well, you asked the question.
Yes. Assuming now that a person is going through the fundamentals of Adlerian psychology, the basic principles and theory.
Yeah, wait a minute. Because you say already an awful lot in a few words. Going through the whole theory. It was easy for the people in Europe because they knew the different languages and they could read all the Adlerian books and what Adler has written in the original language and understand it. In the English-speaking countries there are only translations and some of them are not as accurate, I would almost say, as the German. And the expression is entirely different. So to understand, for instance, take the very important work Gemeinschaftsgefühl, translated by social interest. Social interest, what is social interest? Gemeinschaftsgefühl is so much more than an interest social, that means for other people. No, it is much more, it is much deeper. In order to understand this, if you know German, you know the quality of the word and you know what is connected with it. So it is the embeddedness, it is belonging, it is sharing, it is doing together, it is a whole lot of things. And that's where you have the difficulty of the language. And then many of the articles that Adler has written and published have not been translated. I've tried to start working on these, but it's very time-consuming. Some others, part of an article has been taken out and has been translated. So it is different, and it is more difficult, I think, for people in English-speaking countries to get the real gist of the Adlerian theories than for people who understand German. I would advise practically people, if you really want to do a good job, learn German and read it in German.
So the task for a student today, an English student today, you're working at a bit of a handicap, as you put it. So one must work a bit harder with perception of reality. This seems understandable for a therapist. He also mentioned Gemeinschaftsgefühl, which I think he described as an older brotherly feeling towards the client.
Yeah.
But he went on, I think, for about 20 some odd points. Do you feel that there is a relationship here?
Oh yes, I think it is a close connection, and I don't know whether Maslow, because I don't know in time how his publications have been, but I know for sure that he was very much influenced by the ideas of Adler and has given it his own expression. But it is not contradictory, it is in essence the same thing.
The reason I bring this up, it seems to me that they are talking about
it is
the
a
same
practical
kind of
way.
development.
Yeah.
I have heard that in the training of therapists, at times there has been a feeling that once one achieves sufficient degree of insight into one's lifestyle, and one has a certain amount of control over one's, shall we say, bad habits or negative tendencies, that what's practically enough to reach this point and to perhaps rather flippantly or jokingly say, well, everybody's imperfect. What I have seen and heard is somewhat of a feeling of that the therapist may advise the client of how to be, but it's not necessarily applicable to oneself. That the therapist may be the exception to the direction.
Well, I would go that far in accepting that idea. I think that everybody is striving towards an improvement. And this is the Adlerian concept. So everybody is also striving towards getting rid of things that you are not satisfied with in yourself. Insufficiencies and shortcomings and faults and whatever it is. The person who doesn't work on that anymore and who says, I can happily live with it, is at a standstill. And I would not think could be a good advisor to other people how to get rid of his imperfections that bother him so much. Because out of imperfections, he has gotten into trouble, or he has found something that he cannot do. There always is a moment that the person found here is something that I cannot solve, but doesn't know that he cannot solve it, and doesn't know how to do better, and believes that he has every right to protest. And that is the moment when he feels the world is against me, and then he comes to the therapist. He accuses the world. He never sees that he has done something that is not adequate because he has developed that in his lifestyle. Now, if you start explaining a lifestyle, that is not enough. A person has to know in which direction does the lifestyle go. What is my personal goal? Because we know very well that every movement that a person makes, psychologically and otherwise, is directed by a goal. You do not make a movement just out of the clear blue sky without a goal. If I want to come to San Francisco, then I take a bus. I don't go in a bus if I don't know where that bus is going.
As you talk about this, I'm thinking of some of the work I have seen demonstrated at some conventions and conferences where the Adlerian therapist was working with a client, probably in a demonstration, and the attitude of the therapist seems to me, or has seemed to me, to reveal a goal of being either a showman or a rather aggressive approach in which one was intimidating the client. The therapist, too, reveals his goals in the way he works. And I wonder to what degree Adlerians have been that honest with themselves about the manner in which they do this therapy. I've seen Adlerians work who are not very warm, not very caring, but who seem quite sharp and intellectually brilliant in being able to see things and we report on things.
Yeah, well, I think that also results will be according to what the therapist is like. Adler's saying was that even if you get a grown-up man in therapy who needs to be helped, he has to be treated by you the way a mother would gently treat her child. Always with utmost gentleness. So it is the opposite of what you are telling me.
Yeah, because this is often what I see is missing. I mean, this is what I have learned from you and what I have attempted to do myself.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. It clients respond to this, usually so very well. But I don't see this frequently enough to have it verified as the stamp of the Adlerian approach.
That reminds me of what Adler said. People who don't agree with me and who don't agree with Adlerian psychology, or individual psychology he mentioned, I would rather not have in our group. That's what he said, literally. He expressed that very clearly. That was in one of the lectures that he gave, and it impressed me very much. It always stuck in my mind. If you can't do it the right way, then I really don't consider you to belong.
Which I think is quite reasonable. One of the problems, this is a slight digression, but one of the problems we've had in the Bay Area has been coming up against a resistance in the academic community against what many of the professors believed Adlerian psychology was as a result of some influences here several years ago when some Adlerians came out to the West Coast and presented and left a very strained feeling about Adlerian psychology. The common denominator in many of the comments seems to be it was so aggressive, it was rather caustic, and there was a kind of a bad feeling. One of the challenges we have today is to correct this impression. And I think it's somewhat unfortunate, but it's one of the tasks that must be done.
Adler always has warned that everybody is bogged down by his own point of view. And a person out of personal need can become an Adlerian psychologist and not get rid of his shortcomings if he hasn't gone through an analysis. That is why it was stressed in Vienna that everybody would take a study analysis so that he could get rid of his own shortcomings. And I have met people who were quite advanced even in Adlerian psychology, who admitted that it was too bad that they had not taken their personal analysis in Adlerian psychology. Now in Holland, when we were having a study group, we always asked that everybody who would go in and do therapy would take a study analysis. That was one of the demands that we made. And it helped people.
Now this creates a rather practical problem here.
It was a practical thing, and then, of course, the next thing was that the work should be supervised for a long time, and you should work together with a well-trained, well-established individual psychologist in order to see if you could still improve, and finally you would feel completely free and you would know that you were in the right direction. You know? It is very strengthening if you're being trained that way.
This brings up a practical consideration. How many Adlerians in the United States are capable of giving such a study analysis?
Now, I have not the faintest idea because I don't know them all. I've been too busy in practice to meet everybody. I've been even too busy to go to all the conventions and meet everybody. So I don't know.
I wonder if this is not a somewhat common problem, and that is that there are perhaps several people who have the ability to train and to counsel who have not had that much exposure like yourself because they have been so busy working.
It could very well be, yes, yes. Yeah. Why don't you write? Well, I have had no time to write because I was too busy with the people I had to help. And you can't do two things in one time. It's not possible.
I would wonder how a person, let's say, who was lecturing all around the country, who was appearing East Coast, West Coast, Europe, how this person would have a client load, how they would be able to do work with individuals, perhaps.
You would have to ask them personally. I can't see it, because the people I have had as clients needed me to be present, and I prepared when I was going on a vacation ahead of time so that they would accept and would be able to take a vacation from me. And I have had some quite serious cases that really needed help right there, not just something where it is superficial and where you can very quickly give an advice and people catch it and that's that.
There is one somewhat subtle aspect of doing therapy, which we have talked about a few times, but I'd like to focus on it for a moment, and that is the creative part. Let us say a person has the brains to understand and has the feeling to make contact with somebody and to deal with them in a very nourishing way.
You're talking about the therapist now?
The therapist, yes. In order to do creative therapy and to use the principles creatively, it sounds almost like the individual must have a kind of an artistic nature. Is that the implication?
If you equate creativity with artistic capacity, yes. One can live in a creative way and not particularly be an artist.
Mm-hmm.
And the creative way is away from the rules, understanding what the fundamentals are, what the important points are, and applying them in a creative way, not in a 1, 2, 3 way.
So creative here then actually means absolutely original. At the moment.
Every case is original, yes.
So then, as one is doing therapy, and I'm talking from personal experience, and you are empathizing with what a person is presenting to you, and then you begin to see something in a relationship, and you present it, and you think to yourself, I have never thought this thought before. This is coming out right now, spontaneously, in a very unique way, and it seems to fit, and I never could have anticipated it, and
exactly.
That is the creative moment.
Creative, yes, that is a creative way. And it is the result of what you do together. That's the beauty of it too.
Yes, you are using what the individual has given you, and you are seeing it from a little different point of view, or you are abstracting different relationships and presenting it with a clarity the individual never
because you
saw.
mixes it with your knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And the knowledge is what your client doesn't have. But you have the knowledge. So what happens in your brain is that the mixture is with what you know. And you apply that knowledge, and I would say automatically that part of your knowledge that you need comes to the fore. And right there it is, and there you have the creative act in, again, using the contact you have with your client to tell him, could it be that? And you never hit him over the head with, and this is so and so. That we don't do.
Mm-hmm. This concept of automatic is kind of fascinating. I've heard you say in the past, as you work with a client, to fill yourself up with the impressions of the client without trying to get something, without trying to extract something, but simply absorb, see, listen, hear. And then if you have done your preparation, if you have trained yourself well, something will come to you. It's sort of a trusting attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because you still follow certain guidelines, and that is the movement that is hidden in all the things that the person is telling you. And you get that movement out because you are keen on detecting that movement. So you want to know what is the movement the person makes, and you also want to know the radius of his activity. And the radius of his activity shows you where it stops, where he couldn't function any longer, where the problem is. So that's the logical again. And there you immediately get the impression of, here it is. Now I see it very clearly. Now I have to be very cautious in how I present what I have found to my client.
Sounds like the left and right side of your brain are operating in
Both
great cooperation.
They are, indeed.
Because
indeed.
there are intuitive leaps
yes.
that one has to make across time and space, going from the past to the present, imagining relationships, maybe graphically, psychologically, and then putting it in a format which then is spelled out clearly and logically so the person is able to understand it. Sometimes an image is helpful, but an explanation is helpful too, and therein lies that connection between the left and the right side. So there is a dual demand on the therapist to be both intuitive and imaginative and take creative leaps, and then be very logical and express oneself very, very clearly.
Yes. And this is expressed, and the feeling tone of the therapist is expressed in the warmth of the voice, the way you look at the person, and the way you listen to what the person has to say, and showing of empathy from the very beginning. I understand that this is very difficult. I know that this must have given you a lot of misery. Then the encouragement of it can also be different. And every time when a person leaves your office, he has to feel encouraged that it can be different, that he will not be stuck in this, that he and you together are working on this. That is why it is so important that he immediately learns to cooperate, and that he is not being told what is the matter with him, but he learns to discover together with you what is bothering him. Because what is lacking, we know very well in people, and more so nowadays than ever before, is really their feeling for other people, their connectedness with other people, their embeddedness in society, and in a society that they reject in many aspects. So how can you be embedded while you reject so much? That puzzle by itself. And still we have to do this in order to improve what we disapprove of.
You say people today seem to be more disconnected. What are the influences that you think create such a mass difficulty?
I have known the times before the world wars. That was entirely different. We lived in an entirely different society. So the influence that we have now from society are much more demanding. There are lots of things people cannot be satisfied with. There are the influence of drug abuse, of young children drinking, so alcohol abuse. We have all these different things. There is a different relationship between the parents, where very often two parents work, and the children. The child coming out of school doesn't find the mother home. There are many social influences that make it much harder to grow up. And we have to look at that. Adler never left social influences out. And he has worked under very bad circumstances after the First World War. And then, of course, the Second World War came when he had already died, but he saw what was happening, and he saw what was coming, and he saw the threat all around. He recognized that very much. And those are tremendous pressures. Think of children now in a family where right now the father is laid off. So they have that much less money to go around and for their daily needs and everything else. They're being helped, oh yes, but what do they do about it? Then how is the atmosphere in the house? Are people complaining? Are they trying to do something? all kinds of influences. I'm sorry to find that we still have a tremendously high concentration of people in big cities and a tremendously high population, an overpopulation, which doesn't help people to feel comfortable. Where do children have a place where they can safely and freely play? So it begins already in early childhood. And an awful lot of adjustment has to be made in early childhood. Now you know very well that if children have to adjust, they also can protest. And many of them do. And you find all kinds of protests at the schools, and not wanting to learn, or thinking that everything that is difficult you shouldn't do. And there you have the beginning of the wrong lifestyle. Adler was the one who always stressed we have to start in the schools with young children. And we have to start with the mothers.
In addition to these influences that you talk about, it seems in this country there is, in many cases, a preoccupation with money as an end in itself.
Oh, yes.
Now we're seeing some of the crises that develop as a result of this preoccupation. Do you have some thoughts in this direction as to why people will be so preoccupied with the pursuit of money or possessions or wealth rather than the self-development and the connectedness and the helpfulness to other people?
I think because people have that wrong belief that money makes it safe to live, and it doesn't. Money has never made anybody particularly safe. And the people who have an awful lot have a lot of anxiety that they will lose it. So money by itself doesn't do it. But the conquering of skills so that you can help yourself, in another word, a creative way of living, is what gives a tremendous amount of feeling of safety, no matter where you are. Because then you even can camp in a tent if it is necessary. And you don't have to have all the luxury.
So you deal with what is possible.
And yes, and they have that competition of outdoing each other in having a bigger car or have a more expensive car or going on a longer trip or possessing nicer furniture or whatever. And they believe that that is their value. And they don't see the value of being with each other, helping each other, and of conquering something.
So the individual then who tends to drift towards the easy life has not learned to conquer difficulties and enjoy that conquest, and is retreating into a kind of a self-pampering, easy life.
And possessing
things.
Possessing things. And if you start that, then you know very well that the things begin to possess you. So instead of conquering something and enjoying the conquering and the doing, it is the having, which is a dead-end street. That is static. It's not dynamic.
So part of Adlerian therapy is really philosophy, because we're talking about values.
Yes, we are talking.
The client may have values that are not helpful to him or her or to other people. And those values actually need to be discussed and alternatives considered.
Usually the values, and talking about the values comes out at the end of therapy, if necessary. But I would think it is the last thing. It is not the beginning. There are people who hang on to everything that is, well, an object or that they can touch. but it is not particularly necessary to talk about these things.
But this is, as you talk about this, what comes to mind is what Maslow had to say about motivation. And he talked about deficiency motivation, people who are motivated by what they feel is missing in them. They feel that perhaps approval is missing, or acknowledgement, or fame is missing, or security is missing, or love is missing, and they pursue it with an intensity and a compulsiveness. It's almost like there's an it that is missing. But when an individual, according to Maslow, begins to function in a self-actualizing way, they transcend these assumed needs and begin to live according to what he called the being values, or be values, which he said may have a particular emphasis for one individual or another, but they tend to be talking roughly about the same thing, such as a person may find that the pursuit of truth motivates them, or the pursuit of uniqueness motivates them, or justice, or order, or ritualness, that in his own way, perhaps the person may be an attorney, or a psychologist, or an artist, or a philosopher, or a teacher. The individual is going after a basic value which stimulates and motivates him, rather than trying to make up for something that was missing, that one can't get enough of. So I guess depending upon this, how far the individual comes and their capacity for discussing this, one could get into such a deep philosophical
that happens. That does happen. Yes. And also people very often soon begin to see the relativity of what they have been pursuing and change over to something entirely different. So they change their value system, if the therapy goes well.
Let's get back to therapy going well.
Yeah.
The very first contact I assume you have with an individual who's interested in therapy is, let's say, a telephone conversation. Do you attach any special...
You mean a student, a future student?
No, I'm a client now.
Oh, a client.
We're switching gears for the moment. We're talking about this so that students may benefit from this discussion.
Yeah.
But let us say that you have the first contact from a prospective client. Someone calls you and would like to make an appointment. Do you generally ask for any information on the phone, or do you simply make it a matter-of-fact, cordial appointment time?
I ask for the name and the telephone number, and usually the address, and then we make an appointment.
Okay. Do you make any conclusions from the way the person talks to you on the phone, or are you leaving it very open at that point? Do you start guessing at the point of the phone call?
Well, yes, you cannot help but guess, because you get an impression. And some people are very much rushed and want to come in an hour practically, and other people can wait a few days and are accommodating to the time that you have. And some people are very desperate and say, well, can I not come any sooner? You know, this happens, and you get your conclusions out of that, yes. And you keep them, I would say, on the back burner to see if this is real or if it is forcing you into something. I have found that some people who want to come right now are trying to force everybody to do what they want them to do. So I keep an open mind in what is the meaning of this, and are you really very desperate? And usually they are not so desperate. It is part of their lifestyle that they have done this.
Let us say now the person comes for their appointment and you meet them for the very first time. What is the impression that you want to give the person?
The impression I want to give the person?
Yes. If you could sort of stand back and look at yourself, looking at it from the say the client's point of view, what do you want them to see? What kind of
A
attitude?
person who is not any better than they are. We are on an even level. So I do not want to have any impression of knowing better or of being someone special or whatever. No. And I think it makes it very comfortable if you begin to ask immediately, may I have your full name and your address and your telephone number? Do you work? May I have your telephone number at work? Are you married? Do you have children? Do you belong to any religion? Then you have an overall very quickly in the beginning, and people are used to giving some information like that, and you have an idea. I always include religion too, because I know that people sometimes are brought up in a specific way. It is very good as an Adlerian that you know the different aspects of different religions, so that you can understand what the upbringing of the child has been and what the child may have misunderstood or understood, used, abused, or not used at all out of that part of upbringing.
I know you have mentioned this many times, and also the cultural background.
The cultural background is important, yes.
And I see so little of this in the literature. Adlerian literature is something to question or to evaluate. There is a lot of emphasis given to family constellation, which is understandable because it is so useful, and to early memories, and into the character of the parents, and to the atmosphere at home. But I think these two elements need more emphasis, the religion and the cultural aspect. Once you get this initial intake information, how do you invite the person to get into what brings them there, assuming now that they...
Oh, I asked them, what can I help them with? And what is the difficulty they find right now? And sometimes you get that and sometimes you don't get it, because there is an external factor that they mention, and that of course is not the real difficulty. So the beginning and what they tell you is something where they all of a sudden had a feeling, I hit my toe on a big stone and now my toe hurts so much. And they forget that they are a whole person. And why they didn't see that there was a big stone, and how could they have avoided the big stone. So there's more behind it. But it is always something that is external. And once in a while a person comes with a real trouble that he cannot overcome, and then this leads to the real reason why he cannot overcome this. So it is not what immediately is brought up that you really are working on. He wants to get rid of that causes a symptom.
Would you, within the first or second interview, try to get information about the individual's childhood and past? Do you wait for this, or do you try to elicit it out?
In the first interview, I let the person talk as much as possible.
In any direction that they're
In any
talking?
direction.
Do you try near the end of the interview, let's say the person is going on and on with a series of difficulties and a distress, and you see it's coming close to the end of the time.
Yeah.
Do you try to, in any way, give them some kind of hope or perspective on what might happen or what's possible? Or do you simply say, we're coming to the end of the hour, shall we make another appointment? How do you finish off that first interview, assuming now the person has simply been giving you a great range of information?
To begin with, I always have a first interview timed at such a way that I can go overtime. If you want to call an hour the regular time, then I can go somewhat overtime, so that I'm not pressed for time. So if a person has to say an awful lot more, even if I have given extra time, then I say, there is still an awful lot more that you want to tell me. So I'm just mentioning what is a fact. And I would like to continue for the next interview. Can you come at such and such a time? You have already said quite a bit. And we have to work on this together. I make that together very, very clear. Would you like to come back at such and such a time? And I have never had a no. They always come back. And then at the door, I always bring people to the door. I tell them, we are going to work on this. So next time, we'll talk some more about this. In the meantime, if there are other things that you find that you want to tell me, please keep them in mind or write them down. And it's reassuring that they know that I am very deeply interested in what they are telling me.
How often would you like to see a person if they have the time and the means?
That depends entirely on the difficulty and how deep the difficulty is, and if they are very desperate, they should come back in a couple of days.
But ordinarily, if there is not the desperation, does once a week seem to be sufficient?
Then once a week can be sufficient, yes.
The person
and
says,
also, in the first interview, I always talk about the finances. And according to what I have a set fee, but if they cannot meet that, then we decide on what they can afford.
if a person says to you, how long is this going to take?
That is one thing that I cannot predict, because it depends on how well we work together. Now I strengthen again cooperation.
What if the person says to you, look, I'm a very busy person, or I'm going to go on a trip and so on. I can work for about 2 months. What if they propose a time limit? Or they simply say, I don't want this to go on forever. I'm willing to work for a month or 2 months. How would you respond to this stated limitation that the person puts out?
I would want to know why they set the limit of 2 months. And if, for instance, they say, well, then I'm going away, or I'm going on a trip, or whatever, or I have no more time, then I say, all right, then let's have daily interviews.
Good point.